So this week we're talking about how do we help our students and how do we train folks to help, counselors in training conceptualize clients. And I want to kick it off with a story, right? Because I had a student that kind of connected to one of the frameworks I really dig. And before seeing a client that would come in and talk about it, and I just thought that the way that they conceptualize clients was like spot on. I was like, wow, this student really has it together. And then when I went and watched them do a few sessions, we were struggling, right? We were struggling. And I think, it's one to be able to conceptualize and answer that question, like, what is the problem? What's creating suffering? And then there's another to go and sit with the human experience and help them with that. And I'm just curious, from your own experience, how do we teach? Not only how do we do, but how do we teach people to teach people to conceptualize and to actually, do great counseling?
Right. Well, I'll just start off. I actually just taught that exact same course. And one of the things I think that's really critical is just gathering information. I don't want to say data points because that's not who I am. But there are different ways. Certainly intake is critical, and as well as, obviously screening, intake, and then also treatment planning. They should all fit together. And one of the things about intakes is that they're all different. One may actually have an emphasis on family of origin. Others, for example, I use an addiction model, which is called the ASAM. And that one is just looking primarily at addiction. So when I'm thinking about case conceptualization, it really is a little bit of all those people. And I liked how you said that is, what is the problem? If you're solution focused, you don't use that word, but nonetheless, why is the client there? And then we look at, I used to think in journalism, who, what, when, where, and why. Okay, when does the problem show itself? Who is the problem? Where is the problem? So on and so forth. So I can tell you that at least as you are moving through this program, you're going to have to teach your students how to do well-informed assessments. They're going to have to know about different screenings, and certainly treatment planning is really important. And that sounds so uninteresting, and yet it also gives them an opportunity to begin that telling the story.
I just love hearing the intentionality you have behind it because for folks that haven't met you yet, anyone that runs into Marty, they're like, I love Marty. Any past student, it's like, it's just they talk about how they love Marty. So here we're hearing one of our colleagues talk about the intentionality, right? And the who, what, where, when, and why, and everything going through your head. But like that relationship, I know, still comes into all of it because every time I run into someone related to Regis, they're like, I love Marty. So.
And if I could just say, if you probably have taught practicum and so on and so forth, I find that's the hardest thing, that they go in to do an intake and they somehow forget that there's a human being in the room. It's only about questions. And that is the art of what we do, I suppose. Yeah.
And that made me think of a couple of things. One, how do we holistically look at a client, and not just from our theoretical lens, but the whole picture of their life, right? Combining a lot of those things that you mentioned, like family systems or substance use, the whole gamut of what they go through. And then I thought of a little story as I'm teaching practicum now, and just recently the student, 3 sessions in or something with their client, and she was saying, well, I don't feel like I have any ground to stand on. And so we did some case conceptualization exercise to look at it holistically and see the client and see what were priorities and how we could synthesize information and then connect that to the students' theoretical base that they're trying to attempt to develop here. And the next session, she was able to go in and implement something in a much more confident way. And I think the other really important piece about that too is we can learn so many things knowledge-wise in our head and read it from the book, but then when we get in the room, something comes over us, especially early on. And so really coming back to that person as the counselor as well, and what are some of those barriers and blocks that get in the way of the implementation, like the student you talked about.
And if I could just say something, I know how much you value relationships, and I was thinking, we talk about case conceptualizations for the therapist, and maybe there's some level that it might be important for the client to also be involved in their own case conceptualization. So I appreciate your valuing the relationship, that co-creating. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I feel like some of the things that I'm struck by are like the intentionality piece behind it of like when we're doing case conceptualization, like the why behind it, and it's not just to be able to create the treatment plan to be able to get reimbursed by insurance. That's like, that's not the why, or at least I hope it's not. But like, what's the intention behind it, and being really kind of committed to that intention. So from your theoretical framework and being able to kind of apply cohesively your theoretical framework, but then also I think the cognitive flexibility that's required in case conceptualization, which is that things change or evolve or you see things differently, and also being like holding that with an open hand of like, you've thought about it, you're thorough, you've done your assessment, all of that, and I'm going to hold it with an open hand because the client might come in that week with something completely different that maybe doesn't quite fit. And so having the flexibility and to be able to say, okay, I'm going to set that to the side right now and be with this person. And afterward in supervision, we can figure out like the intellectual piece of it, but I'm going to be with this person right here and right now.
I love it how y'all are bringing in the judgment values into what you're saying, because that's what it's about, right? Like treating the whole person. And for me, just to share a quick story, is I studied music as an undergrad, and I remember once like hearing this brilliant musician perform, and I was able to talk to him, and it was like, can you teach me how to do that? And he was like, no. But that's the problem. Like, we might be good clinicians, but now we're being called to teach this. So as we think about like conceptualizing different cases, we have to go ahead and know how to do it ourselves. Then we have to learn how do we teach others to do it. And then we have the kind of call to teach people how to teach folks how to do it. So just fascinating to hear all the perspectives and to bring those kind of judgment values in. So thank you for the convo, everyone. We'll keep it going.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Jim.